Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of the Palmetto Guardian. I'm Specialist Anna Grace Catoe, and today we have two very special guests, so I'll let them introduce themselves.
Good morning, and I'm very honored to be back to do another podcast. I'm Jennifer Wolff, and I am one of the behavioral health specialists. I cover Region 4.
Good morning. I'm Ann Mack Prevost. I am also a behavioral health specialist, and I cover Region 5. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I'm happy to be here. This is my first time.
Awesome. So it seems like we have a really informative topic today. We're talking about anxiety and different ways to cope with those, different resources you guys have. So I'll just let you get into it.
Sure. Well, Ann Mack and I were talking about doing this in two parts. I'm a certified trauma specialist with a great deal of background in trauma recovery from work and personal related trauma and crisis management. So she is a very skilled expert in the anxiety area, and the two usually can complement each other, but there may be different techniques that don't necessarily work with regular anxiety versus anxiety that was trauma related. So we were going to talk about both and what the differences are, and then what you can do to manage. So, Emma, do you want to talk about anxiety?
Sure thing. So we are all humans, and we all experience anxiety. So I think that is something for us to all just remember and accept. Oftentimes we want the anxiety to go away because it's uncomfortable. And what happens when we try to push it away and avoid it, it gets worse. So understanding anxiety, I think, is going to be very important today. So I wanted to reframe it as really what it is. And it is your body's response to danger in the environment. And it's there to protect us. If you think about the cavemen back in the day, anxiety response helped them not get attacked by a bear, right? So what happens is we may get an email, we may get a look from a coworker, anything, and our bodies might respond like we're getting attacked by a bear. So it's important to acknowledge our anxiety and accept it, and to know and to remind ourselves that we are actually safe and that we can cope in healthy ways.
What are some signs that we might be experiencing anxiety that your normal person might not be aware of?
Great question. So anxiety is large. There's a huge physical component. So you might have sweaty palms, your heart might be racing, you might have extra stiff muscles, stomach aches, headaches.
Just a fear-based thinking is what I thought about, is when immediately you're given a new situation or a transition, immediately it's that catastrophic thinking.
Yes.
You covered it as far as the bodily signs, but I would add it's the mind over the body. And
right. Yes, and we get trapped in these unhelpful thinking patterns that really increase our anxiety. We might think in all or nothing terms, and so what happens if we don't give ourselves any wiggle room in the middle? So if something is, we have these extreme views, and that can create anxiety. We might struggle with perfectionism if we think like that, and then oftentimes that leads to not feeling good enough and feeling more and more anxious and struggling to do to be good enough. We might get caught up in what ifs, which would be situations where we really are just making up stories in our head that create anxiety. What if this? What if that? What if this? What if that? When in reality, we're really wasting our time with that and just making ourselves more anxious. Shoulds is a common cognitive component of anxiety. I should be doing this. I should be doing that. Should. I tell people all the time, stop shoulding on yourself, because it really isn't helpful. And then looking at things through like a negative filter. So we might always see the worst case scenarios and situations. And those limiting beliefs really lock us into that anxiety-based thinking.
And I would add with trauma, and going to that angle, is it's usually all of those, some of the coping skills overlap and all of the symptoms overlap, but usually with trauma, post-traumatic stress, there is the reliving of that experience. I recently worked with a young girl who was having all this anxiety and continued to have it, but the more we talked, it was actually a soldier, it was more trauma related because that experience of what she had been exposed to kept coming to the forefront. So it was anxiety as a symptom of that core life threat, danger, what had overwhelmed the system. And I think the only difference between regular anxiety and anxiety that is trauma is that talk therapy and the cognitive may not necessarily always work with trauma-related anxiety. It's more physiological and implanted in the body. So it's more the body work versus just the cognitive work.
I was going to ask about the difference between those two, so thank you.
Welcome.
I guess what would be the first step in being able to identify that someone is struggling with anxiety for that person to be able to identify that it actually is, affecting their life in a negative way?
Well, I think the second part of your question, you almost answered it. It's if it's interfering with your daily life, we all experience anxiety, and it's part of being human. But when anxiety, and it's a part of us, right? So when that part becomes that part gets too loud, that anxiety part of us is in the driver's seat. Mm-hmm. That's when it can wreak havoc on our lives. When it interferes with our daily life and it becomes overwhelming and it feels like it's too much to manage alone.
Are there any coping techniques that we could talk about for the soldiers and families listening and watching?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, I would say definitely because traumatic exposure is more of a in the body, that some of the coping skills have to deal specifically with learning how to retrain the mind and the body to respond to danger threat. So deep breathing is a progressive muscle relaxation. I would mention along the line, and I'm a regular practice, a yoga practice, yin yoga especially. The benefits of yin yoga, and I can't stress this enough, is that fight, flight, freeze response, where actually yin causes us to rest and digest. So when you're jacked up all the time, it's going to purposely target that nervous system. So that can be very effective. I think monitoring your progress is extremely important with trauma because you really need to know, like generalized anxiety is usually across, I feel anxiety all the time, whereas trauma-related anxiety is more specific and there's usually a trigger involved. And so journaling, but monitoring your progress, like, okay, I began to relive that experience or felt overwhelming anxiety. What was going on for me? What happened right? What is my trigger? And then usually grounding techniques and mindfulness can help tremendously with that. I'm here. It's okay. Normalizing that, listen, I'm not, lots of people say, and we've heard it many, many times, what is wrong with me? I am losing my mind. Why am I reacting this way so intensely? It's not a mind thing, it's a body thing because the body has gone in, and it's normal having been exposed to something that you couldn't possibly prepare for that was so abnormal. And that's what trauma, anxiety related.
For sure. And just to piggyback off of that, some everyday tips and strategies to manage anxiety. Nobody likes to hear this, but acknowledging it and accepting it is going to be huge. Oftentimes we just, like I said earlier, we want it to go away. It's uncomfortable. We don't want to feel discomfort. And we do things lots of times to try to avoid the anxiety. We numb out in various ways. The phone, the drinking, gossip. I mean, all kinds of things. We can just numb out on Netflix, chocolate, whatever it is. We all have our things that we try to do to numb out and not feel that discomfort, when that really can increase the anxiety. It might work for short term, sure, but basically accepting the anxiety and validating it. So really talking to yourself. I feel anxious. It's okay that I feel anxious. I'm going to be okay. I can get through this. I've done hard things before. So really those cognitive tricks can help, that positive, encouraging self-talk. And then like Jennifer said, it is so largely physical that getting up, like if you're at your desk at work and you feel like you were so anxious, get up and go walk. Move your body. But she mentioned yoga, and yoga is huge. It's so helpful. You could also Google desk yoga, if you're like in the middle of the workday and you just feel like, so that would be a strategy. Also writing down what you're worried about, and sometimes you can identify it, and sometimes there's something you can do about it, and that's nice. Sometimes we're worrying about things that we can't control, whether it be the weather or, all types of things. So letting the things go that you can't do anything about, doing things about the things you can do things about, and then really kind of leaning into it and accepting it as being part of being human.
Wow, yeah. I mean, that makes it seem not as, I guess, scary whenever it's broken down that way. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I would mention also it's extremely important with all that we talked about is that loved ones and family understand what anxiety, post-traumatic stress is and what it isn't. Because someone's perception when they're struggling is so sometimes skewed, and you can, in one statement, like, you just need to get over it. How many times have we heard that? Or, what is wrong with you? And you already, none of us are broken. We don't need to be fixed. But that's where behavioral health can help families, and part of what we do as counselors is, listen, how you respond, this is helpful, this is not. Because you can imagine in relationships when you're struggling and then somebody tells you to get over it. We don't get over anything, we get through it. So that's families, and how to respond and help is just as important as the management part. So,
absolutely. And to piggyback off of that, if you have a child or a teenager who is struggling with anxiety in your house, we both do, service members and their family members. And oftentimes, parents want to know, what do I do with my anxious child? And really helping them identify and acknowledge what they're experiencing is huge. So Dan Siegel, he calls it name it to tame it. So you basically help your child realize that they're feeling stressed, and you assure them it's okay to feel stressed. I totally get that. Like Jennifer said, you don't want to talk them out of it, because then they just feel like, okay, well, you don't get me. And so they just shut down. Mm-hmm. And so you really want to keep that connection going with your child by acknowledging their anxiety and validating it. And it's a lot easier to do that for your child when you're able to do it for yourself. So just practice acknowledging and validating your anxiety every day as being part of being a human, and then that can help you, help your kids get through things as well.
And I would also mention exactly that, we are a wired society. We're on our cell phones, we're on our iPad, we're just all the time to really carve out that space. I'm one of the worlds where I'm learning finally how incredibly unhealthy that is. So to really do a schedule, carve out times that you're not on your cell phone, because it really affects sleep, eat, if you're too much of something, too little. So you have to really set those boundaries and those limits, especially with external circumstances and people. And sometimes this all sounds well and good, but you're like, but that's my kid or that's my loved one. I need that neutral person that because they're triggering me all over the place, and I can't be, and that's where we come in. And that's where we say, hey, this is what I'm seeing, and you may not be unaware, or someone that's struggling may not be able to tell you that, look, that's triggering me all over the place when you say that or when you do that. So we can come in as that unbiased, neutral coaches and counselor and say, hey, let's problem solve this, and this is these are what options are.
Is there a common scenario that you all see that might help our listeners out to maybe be more inclined to reach out for help if they need it?
That is such a great question.
Yes.
Thank you. I would say, and Mac said it beautifully, like we all struggle with something. We're human. We're in the flesh. So reducing the stigma of mental health and just saying, listen, we all need each other and we all need to help each other. So I would say the more we talk about it, the less stigma there is associated with seeking help. It's the people who need it that don't get the help that usually struggle the most. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I also think, too, that the way service member family care is designed, I think is so cool, how you have counseling that's free to service members and family members. You're not having to deal with an insurance company where you might have to have this diagnosis and yada, yada, yada. Everyday people can get help for everyday problems that we all have. So it's really, when you say a common scenario, I think a common scenario is people thinking like, well, I could use some help with this, but I don't know if it's big enough to actually call a behavioral health specialist. And we're here to say we do all types of things. There's no problem too small or too large. And we are here to support service members and family members in any way that we can. And we all are humans trying to navigate life's challenges, and just, I think, reaching out when you need some help. And again, even if it's with your child or if you just want to get some help yourself, it doesn't have to be some huge thing that's going on. It can be, but it doesn't have to be.
Just going to say that I think it definitely doesn't help anyone to downplay our own issues and make them seem smaller just for the sake of everyone else. So for anyone that needs to reach out, just even for a little bit of help, like that's always fine.
Yeah, and sometimes people think I got to walk in an armory and I got to walk near a community. That's not how it rolls. I mean, we will meet you anywhere. We're just people, just like anybody else. So it can be on a walking trail. It can be we spend a great deal of time in the field simply because people are not comfortable a lot of times with coming in to see, quote, behavioral health in an armory. So we will go out. We're free, no charge. It's a phone call. We show up.
Well, yeah, I'm really glad that you mentioned all of that, actually, especially the part about a walking trail. Like,
Yes.
that, I feel like that makes people a lot more comfortable and it's not as stiff.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Absolutely. I met somebody on a soccer field one time. The only mistake we made is they were playing soccer. It's like, dodge. But, yeah, I mean, I can't stress enough. And, of course, we're under HIPAA. We're social workers. We're licensed mental health professionals. But we're human beings first. And so to make that comfortable is so important. It can be a Starbucks, a walking trail, a soccer field. And we also offer, we can coach by phone. We can do, sometimes people can't get off their job and they hate parking and traffic is a trigger and all of the above. And so we say, hey, that's where technology can be very beneficial, because we can say, listen, man, how about we do FaceTime, or how about not we have the HIPAA compliant work that we use, but it's so important that people know there's so many different ways now, luckily, that it's not your typical I got to take time off my schedule. I got to go in some weird person's office. I got to fight the traffic that's going to trigger me all over the place. And so by the time you get to therapy, you need more therapy because you're like, ah, and it's so different now.
For sure. And then
awesome.
it's like 2 hours out of your workday as opposed to a phone call.
Absolutely. And that can happen anytime.
Is there a phone number that anyone can call in order to get in touch with you guys?
1-800-681-2558 is our behavioral health line, where you get a primary on-call person and a secondary, and there's a pretty quick response time. My direct number is 803-394-2076. 803-394-2076. I cover Rock Hill in that area. However, you can utilize any of us because we all have different areas of specialty. So there, you do have a behavioral health specialist in your home of residence, but sometimes if you say, well, but my kid's been through some trauma, or I really need, we know each other, and I know that AMAC is excellent with anxiety. My background is trauma, and so if I have a kid that has severe, I'm going to say, hey, there's this wonderful lady. That's how we use each other to help each other, so people can truly get what they need.
And that's also with couples therapy. I don't do couples therapy, but I will send you to one of the behavioral health specialists that do. So we all work together. There's 7 of us in the state, and we all work together to get people where they need to go.
Well, before we wrap up, is there anything else that either of you would like to add?
I just wanted to say that it is truly a gift for myself with 35 years now in the field, showing up for people, and for the military, to which brings in so many more dynamics and sacrifices, and it is truly a gift for me to show up for people when they need me, and definitely within the Guard. So that's what I want to do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us today.
Absolutely.
And just a reminder, we are all humans. We all have anxiety. You can feel discomfort and be okay. And practice feeling that discomfort a little bit every day. It's almost like, think about it like lifting weights, right? You're going to be a little sore. It's going to be uncomfortable. We're used to avoiding what stresses us out. But if you practice it a little bit every day and tune into your body and what's going on, validate and normalize your feelings, it can be very helpful. It can be helpful to digest them, and so that they won't be as big and overwhelming.
Thank you both for joining us today. And to our listeners and our viewers, thank you for joining us as well. If you like this episode, make sure to give us a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe so that you can catch our next episode.